One night, I was working late, preparing marketing materials for a high-end cosmetics brand launch. I had finished the pamphlets and PowerPoint presentations, while yawning every now and then. Finally, I stretched my arms out and looked at the time. It was 11 p.m. I decided to call it a night and go home. I walked out of the office and made my way to the parking lot.
Going home already?
Yes.
Well, just a heads up. There seems to be a roadblock up on Quezon Avenue. You might want to change your route.
I thanked him for the heads up as I got in my car and started the engine. I took out my phone and checked the traffic details. Sure enough, there was a notification about the roadblock. I began to calculate the best route from the office to my apartment. I found one and drove off. I drove slowly, while blasting loud music to help keep me awake. When out of nowhere, I saw a woman standing at the side of the road, all alone. She looked lost and like she had been crying. I stopped my car next to her and lowered my window. "Do you need help?" The woman looked at me and nodded. "I've been trying to get home, but there are no taxis right now. Come inside. I'll give you a ride. It's not safe out here. And who knows, there could be a crazy rapist or thief just waiting to get you." The woman looked at me for a brief moment before getting into the backseat of my car. I asked her where she needed to be while pulling out Google Maps. That's when I realized where I was. She didn't say anything. I began to drive, and we started going through Balete Drive. I asked the woman who she was and what she was doing there, but she wouldn't answer. A few minutes passed. I should have been out of Balete Drive by now, but the more I drove down the street, the more it looked as if I was driving on an extremely long path, or that I was going around in circles. I looked at the rearview mirror to check on the woman, only to find the backseat completely empty. I immediately stepped on the brake and looked behind me. Where did she go? I didn't hear the door open. I started to think that because I was exhausted, I was imagining things. I was sure I stopped the car in front of the woman and gave her a lift. I began to drive once more, staring at the road, when all of a sudden, I stopped the car and stared at the road ahead of me in complete shock. There, standing in the far distance of the road, was the woman I had picked up. Only, she looked completely different. Her face was now pale with blotches of gray, and her cheeks were sunken and hollowed. Her dress was stained with blood and dirt, and was ripped. Her eyes were what terrified me the most, as blood began to trickle down from hollowed black sockets. She began to walk across the road, and suddenly vanished into one of the balete trees that lined up along the street. I started the car once more, and I began to drive. I looked at the rearview mirror, and then I felt the hairs rise on the back of my neck. The woman was sitting in the back seat once more, staring at me with bloodshot eyes and an almost eerie gaze. In that brief instant, I lost all senses as I began to drive as fast as I could, hoping to get out of Balete Drive and possibly get away from this woman. I didn't know where I was headed or how fast I was going, but every time I saw the woman in the rearview mirror, it just made me drive faster and faster. Then I saw the familiar street that led to my apartment. I quickly entered the street and stopped in front of my apartment. I looked at the rearview mirror and saw that there was no one in the back. The woman had disappeared. I quickly parked the car and got into my apartment, and for the rest of the night, I practically slept with the lights on. I never thought the stories were true. I will never pass through Balete Drive again. I used to be the popular girl at school. I came from money, was a cheerleader, got straight A's, and got along with pretty much anyone. I never dated in high school though. Being the daughter of a minister and all, I was told that I wasn't allowed to have a boyfriend until I turned 18. My best friends used to make fun of me for it, and nicknamed me the Virgin Mary. So once I went away for college, I'll admit that I went a little wild. I joined a sorority, and long story short, I started dating a guy named Dylan. He wasn't the sharpest tool in the shed, but he treated me well. One Friday night, we were all hanging out at the frat house, watching scary movies and celebrating someone's birthday. Inspired by our movie marathon, my friend Tara came up with the bright idea to go to the bathroom and summon Bloody Mary.
Come on, it'll be fun. Don't be such a bore. I've never done it before and I'm sure you haven't either.
I opposed the idea because I don't mess with that kind of stuff, but was pressured into joining her. Fine, but if anything happens, I'm leaving.
Yes, it'll be Mary versus Mary.
We entered the guy's bathroom and Tara grabbed some of the birthday candles and a lighter from her pocket. She handed me a candle. I looked at her in confusion.
Oh, you know, for added effect.
She lit them up and turned off the lights. Then she instructed me to recite Bloody Mary 3 times while looking into the mirror.
Bloody Mary. Bloody Mary. Bloody Mary.
Nothing happened. I didn't want to be a part of it anymore, so I turned on the lights and stormed out of the bathroom. Dylan took me back to my dorm room, and he spent the night comforting me. I didn't want to be alone. The next morning, Dylan was cuddling me, and he noticed scratches on my stomach. I'm known to scratch myself when I'm stressed out, so I didn't put much thought into it. For the next few weeks, I couldn't quite explain the state I was in. I didn't want to hang out anymore, and would suffer terrible nightmares. In my dreams, I'd be back at the frat house, in the bathroom reciting the name over and over again while staring at myself in the mirror. However, the version I saw looking back at me wasn't my normal self. The lights would flicker, and suddenly, I'd see a version of myself that looked like a corpse. She had scratches all over her face, blood running down her eyes, and sunken cheekbones. Dylan would wake me up from my sleep because of my screaming.
Mary, wake up. Oh no, hand me the trash can.
Then I would immediately vomit, and what came out had a tint of red.
Do you need me to take you to the emergency room?
No, it's fine. I'll be okay. Tara came to my room to convince me to have breakfast with her. As soon as she saw me, she was full of concern.
What happened to you? You look like you haven't slept in days.
So she took me to the campus nurse. The nurse couldn't figure out what was wrong with me, so she took samples of my blood and urine to send to the lab. She suspected that I ate something bad and had a parasite. She told me to rest and to wait for her phone call. For the next few days, I couldn't sleep because I kept having the same nightmare. I was losing weight, had no appetite, and had to wear gloves to sleep because the scratches on my stomach were getting deeper and bigger to the point of my shirt being stained with blood. It also hurt a lot to move, so I had to miss classes. One afternoon, the call came. The nurse told me that I was pregnant. I couldn't utter a sound.
Don't worry, you have options. You can come in right now and we'll talk them through. If you need some time to think, that's fine too. I'll be here.
I couldn't believe the mess I was in. When I hung up the phone, I felt something move in my stomach, and the scratches tear a little more. I screamed and called Dylan and Tara to come to my room immediately.
Please, come to my room. I need help.
They told me they'd be by my side no matter what. I told them I couldn't have an abortion because it goes against my beliefs and upbringing. Then I told Tara about my nightmares and how this all started happening after that Friday night.
Has anything strange happened to you? No. I'm sorry.
I told them that I didn't feel like myself anymore.
I need to summon Bloody Mary again.
That's crazy.
What?
You can't.
No. I need to ask for forgiveness for disrespecting her. For some reason, she won't leave me alone.
It felt like a crazy idea, but I had to do something.
Can you please accompany me to the frat house tonight?
That night, I went into the bathroom alone, while Dylan and Tara stood outside the door. I told them not to enter, no matter how much I screamed or cried.
I had an actual candle this time, lit it up, turned off the lights, and stared into the mirror. Bloody Mary. As soon as I uttered the first Bloody Mary, I felt something move in my stomach. Bloody Mary. I said it again and cried in pain as I got a sudden cramp that almost made me fall to my knees. Bloody Mary! I said it the third time and screamed as I felt another tear. I looked into the mirror, focusing on my reflection, and the hairs on the back of my neck stood up. Dylan and Tara tried to enter, but the door was locked. There, in front of me, was the reflection I was all too familiar with now. Except this time, I wasn't dreaming. She looked really angry at me, and in a whispered voice, she said, "Had enough of that parasite growing inside of you? Not so virgin now, are you, Mary?" I started apologizing to her, asking for forgiveness. I told her I would do anything, that she can do whatever, but I just couldn't live that way anymore. I'd rather be dead than not have control over my own body. "You stupid girl, you're so weak." She laughed while scratching her eyes out, and blood came trickling down her face. Then the candlelight went out, and then fell to the floor in agonizing pain. The lights came back on. The door unlocked, and Dylan and Tara ran in and carried me out. They asked me what happened, but I couldn't say anything. "Mary, babe, get up. Can you hear me? We gotta get out of here." I was carried back to my room, and they watched over me as I slept. I suddenly woke up again in pain. I felt extremely wet, and when I woke them up, "Guys, turn on the lights." I looked at my bed, and there was blood all over. They called 911, and I was brought to the emergency room. I lost the baby. I was relieved, but also really depressed for a while, so I decided to take the semester off. I also broke up with Dylan. I needed time to heal and rethink my life choices. Ever since then, I've made changes, and it has brought me closer to my faith. But I still occasionally have nightmares, and am terrified of my own reflection. Being a gamer, it wasn't strange for me to stay up all night in front of my computer killing zombies or reading fan fiction. This is what I did every night, thanks to my snacks, energy drinks, and my faithful gaming setup. But one day, I got bored of all of this. It became sort of like a routine. I tried to go to sleep, but of course I couldn't. So I had to find something to keep me entertained. Well, if the internet and the video games couldn't do that, why not explore the deep web? I started browsing different websites, and nothing seemed to appeal to me. Until I saw something that looked like an ad. Stay up the longest and win $5,000. Really? I thought. That money might as well be mine. I clicked on the ad, and it redirected me to a simple website consisting of a chat room. I just had to create a username, and I was in the race to win $5,000. The camera and the microphone had to be activated throughout the entire duration of the contest. And there were no bathroom breaks. Seemed simple enough. As I waited for the competition to start, I surrounded myself with energy drinks, some empty bottles for you-know-what, and snacks. I could also access the webcam of the other participants, and they could do the same with mine. For the next couple of days, I started to rewatch some shows I loved to pass the time, and everything was great. A few of the participants left the competition in silence, though. Being bored, I started to click on the other webcams so I could check out my competition. After some browsing, I saw someone who was about to fall asleep in the chair, so I decided to wait. Not long after, he did just that, and I thought to myself, another one bites the dust, as I chuckled before taking a sip of Red Bull. But just before I went back to my show,
The guy woke up and started to hold his chest with both hands. He screamed in another language, but I could clearly see he was in pain. I continued watching and blood started to come out of his eyes. It was horrific. A few more screams and his head fell on his desk before his webcam disconnected. What happened? I asked myself. What the fuck is this? I started to switch between webcams and more people died right before my eyes. One after another, having seizures and screaming before their final scream indicated their death. I screamed and tried to call somebody, but my phone wasn't working. It had no reception. Another day passed and there were still 3 people in the race. Not for the money, but for life. And soon, there was just me and another guy who didn't speak English. I tried to talk to him, but it was useless. We were both looking at each other and waiting. My head started to feel as heavy as a chair. I could barely keep it up. I drank another can of Red Bull, and that seemed to help a little. But I was dehydrated and felt overall like I was just about to pass out. Luckily for me, the other guy just fell off his chair, and the next thing I heard was a scream that seemed to come from the depths of hell. The webcam went dark, and a robotic voice started talking to me. "Congratulations, you won. Good luck next week." Next week? I asked, but I didn't get a response. At the bottom of the page, I could see in fine print that every winner will have to participate every week for the next 2 months. Before I could do anything or react in any way, I passed out from the exhaustion. See you next week. Last month, I decided to go on a hiking trip upstate. After half a year of being cooped up inside due to the pandemic, I needed a change of scenery. I left at the crack of dawn, got in my car, and drove off to a hiking trail I knew would be less crowded. I arrived and was glad to see the place completely deserted. I found the perfect trail to follow, and it would take me a couple of hours to reach the mountain peak. It was nice to be surrounded by nature and to get a breath of fresh air once again. After a couple of hours, I finally reached the summit, but instead of relief, for some odd reason, I started to feel anxious. So I took a few pictures for Instagram and headed back down. An hour into my walk, I heard what sounded like a scream. It startled me, so I lost my balance while coming down from a rock. I don't know where the sound came from, as it came from afar. It was very short, and I couldn't see anything due to the trees surrounding me. I felt really uneasy, and my ankle was starting to hurt. I continued downhill, as I didn't want to be stuck there once the sun went down. So I picked up a large tree branch and tried to walk a little faster. As I finally got closer to my car, I started noticing footprints on the dirt. However, they were bloody and then just stopped. I didn't put much thought into it, because I had to prioritize my new injury. I continued walking. But when I got to my car, it was completely wrecked, as if a tree had fallen on top of it. I have the worst luck. I almost chuckled to myself. There wasn't a trace of a large object left behind. My car was just smashed. I didn't know what to do. I didn't know how I'd get home. I was starting to panic at this point, so I pulled out my phone and luckily still had reception. I dialed 911, and an officer was supposed to arrive in 5 minutes. I sighed in relief. 5 minutes isn't too far away, I thought to myself. I started to head towards the entrance of the park, just so they could see me more easily. A couple of minutes later, I heard the police siren coming from the distance. I thought I would cry tears of joy and continued limping towards it. But then, I saw something approaching and poking out of the trees. I couldn't quite make out its features, or at least what I did see didn't make any sense to me. Was this some kind of new rescue vehicle? I took a few steps closer and then saw it. I quickly turned around and headed back towards a tree I could hide behind. What the heck was this monstrosity? It suddenly increased its speed, with its heavy and loud footsteps. It was now a few feet away from me, and it grabbed and picked me up with ease. On a normal day, I would have been able to outrun it. As I got closer to its face, there was blood all over it. It smelled horrible, like rotten flesh and iron. I looked at what I thought was its head and screamed. It tightened its grip, and I thought that was the end of it all. Then I heard another siren coming from the distance. I said a prayer and closed my eyes. Then it dropped me. Crying in pain on the grass, I opened my eyes to see it run off. I was holding my leg in pain, and there was no one there to help me. I never thought I'd die this way. It was hard to see what was happening around me, because I was covered in blood and tears, and I couldn't move a muscle. I was picked up again, and then I passed out. A day later, I woke up in a hospital bed. It turns out I had broken a leg, rib, and had a mild concussion due to the fall. But at least I fell on grass. They said I was lucky to be alive. I explained everything to the doctors, and they looked at me in pity. They didn't believe me because, who would? Maybe it is all due to the concussion. A creature well over 20 feet tall with a siren as a head and dried up flesh. Only someone delusional could come up with that. Growing up, my younger sister Julie and I were made aware by our parents that we came from a very prominent Irish family, the Gallimores. Although our last name was not the typical Irish name like O'Reilly, O'Connell, McGregor, or McIntyre, it was still known and feared widely throughout Ireland. Whenever we asked why our family was feared, our parents would quickly change the subject. Aside from that, we were constantly told stories from Irish folklore to pass the time. One tale in particular used to frighten us, that of the Banshee. For those who do not know, the Banshee is the most feared entity in all of Ireland, known worldwide for the terror she strikes in people. All families in Ireland have a Banshee tied to them at birth. She was originally a fairy who would sing the funeral songs of the family when someone passed away. Over time, though, her singing became sadder, more intense. Until finally, it became mournful, crying wails. The Banshee began to feel her family's pain, and over time that pain twisted her once lithe body into a gaunt and lifeless spirit. Her beautiful red hair turned white, and her green eyes turned black and bloodshot from eternal crying. Her final change was the most fearsome of all. Her magnificent singing voice had now become a horrendous, blood-curdling scream. She was shunned by her family, and she cursed them to be forever followed wherever they went by her. And when a loved one's death was imminent, the family would hear her screams. Those doomed to die would hear the Banshee and would also see her at the very moment they drew their last breath. This tale haunted my sister and me from the moment we heard it. Were we doomed to see the Banshee and hear her cries too, since our family was Irish? Our father received a letter in the mail informing him that he had inherited the family estate, including the majestic, sprawling Gallimore Castle, as the last native Irish member of the family had passed away. To claim the inheritance, our family had to live in the castle for a year. Upon receiving this news, our parents sold our home in America, and we moved to our new home, Gallimore Castle. When the cab and moving truck pulled up to the castle, I started getting chills. The large stone facade looked like every castle from every old horror movie I'd ever seen. As the servants helped us unpack our belongings and we began to settle into our new home, Julie and I went exploring. The corridors were decorated with lavish paintings portraying beautiful landscapes and the family coat of arms. There were even portraits of various family members from centuries past. However, there was one portrait that looked as though it had been shredded by some creature. As we stared at it, we could make out what looked like a little girl's shape. Suddenly, I heard a piercing scream, almost as if a little girl was in pain. Julie was missing. Looking around, I noticed that there was a doorway that had opened up beneath the portrait of the little girl. Peering in, I saw Julie standing inside what appeared to be a girl's playroom. She was staring at herself in a mirror. What I saw staring back at her in the mirror was horrifying. It appeared to be the girl, but she now had snow-white hair and black, bloodshot eyes. As I stared at Julie watching this spirit in the mirror, its face contorted and a long, blood-curdling shriek emanated. At the same time, Julie's eyes in the reflection turned pitch black. I quickly grabbed her arm and ran as quickly as possible out to our parents. When we finally found them, I explained what we found in that tiny room. The servants looked at us in fear and fled from the room. One stayed behind and told our parents that they fled because they feared the Banshee had returned. Our parents brushed it off as superstition and tried to calm me down. That is when I noticed that Julie had not said a single word since we left that room. Thinking about what the servant had said, it made sense, and the pieces of the puzzle started to come together. The girl's appearance in the mirror fit the description exactly, and the scream that pierced the silence of the room drove the point home even more. She was the family's Banshee, and she had marked Julie for death. The rest of that evening, I kept a close watch on my sister. She refused to eat or drink anything at supper and showed no interest in her toys or books. Her joyful demeanor seemed to have been erased from her body. I would walk by her room and swear that I could hear her screaming. Soon, Mom and Dad started to hear the screams too, and not just from Julie's room. They could hear them throughout the entire castle. I even went to her room to see if she wanted to play, and noticed that her hair seemed lighter and her eyes blacker. I had to know what was happening to my sister. I went to the castle's library and started looking through the books for any clue. Finally, an old dusty family record. I found the answer I sought. The Gallimore family Banshee curse was different from the rest. The Banshee spirit could rest if she possessed a family member to take her place, and nothing could stop her after she chose her prey. All at once, a scream rang out through the castle so strong that the very stone walls shook. I took off, running towards Julie's room. Mom and Dad were already there, staring in horror into Julie's room. I pushed my way around them, and there stood Julie in the clutches of the Banshee. Her screams enveloping Julie in swirling, ghostly mist. Julie's hair had turned completely white, and her eyes, black as coal, were weeping tears of blood. Her face had sunken in and become hollow. The Banshee rose off the floor and as she did, Julie's body slumped to the ground. Her face contorted into a ghastly scream. Julie's spirit floated into the air with the Banshee and let out a sharp, piercing cry. As she did so, the Banshee's form melded with Julie's spirit, and the new Banshee disappeared, leaving us behind with a final scream. Mom and Dad grabbed Julie's lifeless body, and we all now knew why the Gallimore family name was feared throughout Ireland. It is a family secret I wish we had never learned.